Can I first of all say the more observant amongst you will realise that I am a new chairperson. I just want to acknowledge the work that Paul has done as chair for the last 3 years. I think it's important to put that on the record. First agenda item is apologies. I don't think we've received any apologies, unless anyone has any.
Oh, Chris has it. Chris has it.
Okay.
Could I just say, I just want to follow through what you were saying about the previous chair. I just want to pay tribute to him and the work that he did with the committee. Although I didn't agree with him politically on a number of different issues, he was a very fine chair and courteous and respectful, and I believe led the committee in many ways very successfully, and I wish him well. And I also wish you well in your new role as chair of this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and I mean, obviously some of us have already said it, and we said yesterday in the chamber just to wish Paul well, and he was a good chair, and obviously to wish yourself all the best in the future as well.
Appreciate it. Okay, folks.
Congratulations. We've said it privately and I will also say it publicly.
Welcome. I appreciate both. Okay. Then we move on to agenda item 2 is the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of December. You'll find these pages 5 to 12 of your packs. If you've had a chance to glance through those, I just signal if you're content. Yeah. Okay, then I'll sign them. Okay. Agenda item 3 is matters arising. Alwyn, do you want to?
Yes, Chair. I have one matter arising out of our consideration of the Justice Bill, not last week, but the previous week. There was some discussion around the common jurisdiction, which is proposed in the Justice Bill, and I had posed the question at one stage, I think it was to the Law Society, whether or not the judiciary, the County Court judiciary, Crown Court judges were content with the provision, and they indicated that they didn't know. Now, I think it might be worthwhile this committee writing to the County Court judges and asking them in their collective format whether in fact they are content, or have they any comments to make in relation to this piece of legislation which will affect them directly. And I think this committee should write to the president of their association.
Okay. Everyone happy enough with that approach? Yeah.
Read, yeah.
Okay. A few items here. The first item I have under matters arising: forward work programme. Forward work programme is from pages 15 to 20 of your folders. The Attorney General will now attend the meeting on the 4th of February to discuss the Justice Bill and various amendments, rather than the meeting of the 20th of January. The Department has written outlining that whilst constructive engagement has taken place with the key stakeholders in various firearms issues, further work, some of which is complex and technical, is required, after which the Department will take proposals back to the stakeholders. An oral briefing on firearms. Okay. An oral briefing on firearms issue has been scheduled for the 20th of January. However, the Department has now indicated that while it could provide a briefing on the interim position on that date, it may be preferable to schedule an oral briefing when the officials are in a position to outline the final proposals and the views of the key stakeholders on them. The relevant correspondence is at page 3 and 4 of your tabled packs. Are we content that the briefing on firearms issues could be rescheduled until engagement with the key stakeholders has been completed, and that the final proposals are available for consideration? Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Also advise that a number of evidence sessions have still to be scheduled, including a briefing by Professor Kathleen Marshall on the Child Sexual Exploitation Report, the Minister of Justice and the Department's response to the recommendations in the report, and Mr Jim Daniel on the Access to Justice Review Part 2. Arrangements will be finalised as soon as possible for these. The second item is correspondence from the Minister of Finance and Personnel. Events have somewhat overtaken that. That response has been received regarding the implementation of the provision in the Public Service Pensions Act relating to RUC widows' pensions. The Minister has indicated He's received clarification from Treasury that there are no repercussive implications under the Statement of Funding policy, and he's not aware of any issues which would delay the payment of pensions to eligible widows. That letter is at pages 21 and 22 of your folders. And obviously last week the committee noted a response from the Minister for Justice indicating that the legal position had been clarified and he had given approval to payments to RUC widows to commence backdated to the 1st of July 2014. Agenda item 4 then is the monitoring round and 6th monthly update on saving delivery plans. Officials will attend the meeting today to outline the Department of Justice January 15 monitoring round position and provide an update on savings delivery plans. The relevant papers you can find at pages 24 through to 123 of your packs today. The Department's consultation document on its 15-16 draft budget proposals is the next agenda item today, and if members have any questions in relation to this, they may wish to take the opportunity to raise them with officials at the end of this evidence session. Everyone clear? Okay. Just like to welcome Glenn Capper, the Deputy Director of Finance, and Billy Irvin, Acting Head of Finance Services Division in the Department, to the meeting. And this meeting will be recorded by Hansard and will be published on the committee website. So if you want to go whenever you're ready, just brief the committee on the monitoring round position, and then we'll open up to questions.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to give you an update on the Department's finances. I plan to cover two separate areas in this briefing. Firstly, a summary of our in-year position following the January monitoring round, and then an update on our savings delivery plans as at the 30th of September 2014. So looking firstly at our in-year funding position. The committee will know that this has been a challenging financial year for the Department. A significant amount of work was done prior to January monitoring to deliver cuts, and these were already reflected in budgets. Therefore, this monitoring round was in many ways an opportunity to ensure that our budget was correctly aligned as we enter the year end, and details are provided in your briefing paper. A number of relatively small easements and pressures were identified, allowing the Department to reallocate funding internally. In relation to the legal aid allocation, this brings the legal aid budget in line with this year's forecast. Importantly, it means that pressures will not carry forward into 2015-16, and you will be aware of the significant cuts facing the Department next year. In relation to policing, PSNI has not declared any additional pressures during January monitoring, and in summary, therefore, the Department will not be submitting any resource bids to DFP. The Department's ring-fenced resource DEL, that's our non-cash budget, is a technical budget for costs such as depreciation and cannot be used to fund other areas of spend. So taking into account January monitoring, we have surplus non-cash funding of around £22 million. And when setting budgets for the budget 2011-15 period, the Department informed the committee that it had surplus budget in this area. In relation to capital, we entered this monitoring round with a capital deficit of £1.2 million. As part of January monitoring, easements totalling £6.9 million were declared. The largest easements were in the prison service and PSNI. So taking into account the deficit of £1.2 million, we now have a net easement of £5.5 million, and this will be surrendered as part of the monitoring round. That position excludes the NI Community Safety College. PSNI had a capital baseline for the college this year of £15.7 million, and the current forecast spend is now £1.4 million. So we had previously surrendered £7.2 million to DFP as part of October monitoring, leaving a balance of £8.5 million. So given the current forecast, a further £7.1 million can now be surrendered. As part of our January monitoring return, we will engage with DFP to determine how this easement should be treated, given that at present access to underspends is in place until the 31st of March 2015. So looking then at savings delivery plans, this is the Department's penultimate update as part of the current budget period, and following today's briefing we will publish our savings information on the Department's website. As the committee will be aware, savings targets for each spending area were factored into our original budget allocations. That is, budgets for each of our core directorates, our agencies and their arm's-length bodies were reduced by the target savings amounts in each of the budget 2011 to 15 years. I should note that these plans, given that they are at the 30th of September, do not take into account the additional cuts and allocations agreed this year as part of October monitoring, and these will form part of the final update at March 2015. So as at the 30th of September, net savings totalling 63 million have been delivered. We forecast total savings of 103 million by the end of this financial year, against a total savings target of 109 million. It's important to note that this position takes into account the costs of the Prison Service Staff Exit Scheme. Final figures are still being firmed up, but because more officers are due to leave than originally planned, we've incurred more costs, but won't see the full financial benefits until the future years. In total, 520 employees left onto the scheme, with the final 12 leaving in May of this year. And based on the most recent estimates, there will be net savings of just over £100 million over the appraisal period. Excluding the cost of the scheme, we would be on course to meet our savings target of £109 million by March 2015. In relation to the savings delivery plans, as you will see from the update, some areas have indicated that there may be an impact on frontline services, and I thought it would be helpful to say something on the key areas. I've mentioned to the committee before that officials continue to work closely with the Probation Board to minimise the impact on frontline staffing. For example, over £1 million of additional funding was provided to the Board as part of its final 2011 to 15 budget settlement to reduce staffing impacts. In relation to the Police Ombudsman, the Office continues to consider process changes to ensure its investigation processes are as efficient as possible without adversely impacting quality. PRRT has indicated that no frontline service has yet been directly affected. However, further cuts will begin to affect the frontline in terms of services provided to clients. Officials continue to liaise with all spending areas to ensure that savings plans remain on track and that savings targets are delivered. And we work with all areas of the various bodies across the department to look at ways to protect frontline services as much as possible. So I hope that provides you with an overview of both our savings delivery plans and our in-year financial position, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you. Members, if you want to indicate if you've got any questions. Can I just first of all ask, clearly, and this is my first committee meeting here, but one of the issues that I certainly am aware of is the cost of legal aid. Could you indicate the total allocation towards legal aid over the last 3 monitoring rounds?
If I start off, and when I'm giving this figure, I'll look for the 3 monitoring rounds figures, but following January monitoring, the closing budget for the Legal Services Commission will be about £107.5 million. The starting point for the budget was £74 million. So over the course of the monitoring rounds, we gave £23.5 million or so as part of June monitoring. And then over the course of the October period, where we had various cuts and allocations, the balance was allocated to bring, as I said, the legal aid budget up to about £107.5 million this year. As I said in my opening comments, that then brings the Commission's budget in line with this year's forecast. I suppose the positive aspect of that is that there will be no pressure from this year left that would otherwise roll into next year and cause, therefore, more cuts in other areas next year.
And in terms of the opportunity costs of having to reallocate that money for legal aid, what areas have we not been able to allocate to as a result of having to find additional money for legal aid?
I suppose it's a combination of what areas have we not allocated money to, but probably more significant this year in terms of cuts. It's about which areas have had to be cut to various degrees to fund some of that legal aid pressure. And it's fair to say that over the course of this year, all areas, albeit the Minister has sought to protect some areas as far as possible, all areas have taken cuts. as a result of legal aid and also, of course, of the wider executive cuts.
Alban?
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome, gentlemen. Just in relation to legal aid, just to follow through on that, given the changes in Crown Court rules and regulations relating to legal aid, one would have expected a saving to come through. Indeed, the Minister has talked about a saving of approximately 20 million per annum arising out of that. Is that absorbed? Has that been absorbed in the increased bill on legal aid caused by the spike in cases that have been addressed in the Crown Court?
Yeah, I think there's a number of aspects to that. You're quite right that the Minister has introduced significant reforms to date in legal aid. And I suppose, had it not been for those reforms, the legal aid forecast and therefore the pressure that we're looking at would have been significantly higher. Yes, so yes, the reforms were designed to introduce savings of around £20 million when they take their full effect. I suppose two thoughts on that. One is, given the life cycle of a criminal case, for example, there are a number of years before cases come through that those savings are fully implemented. And also your point that there has been a significant increase in volume of cases. So in some ways that masks the savings. But to go back to my original point, had it not been for those savings, the pressure would have been significantly higher.
If the volume of cases reverts to pre this year to a more normal level, use that phrase, you would expect some savings then to be more visible in relation to legal aid,
I think,
as far as Crown Court legal aid is concerned.
Had it not been for the increased volume, I think it's correct to say that this year's pressure would have been less, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, just in relation to, if I can leave legal aid and just go on to the hearing loss aspect of this presentation. You say at paragraph 10, the first 12 million of hearing loss is factored into the PSNIs in your budget, with an additional requirement funded by HM Treasury reserve claim. However, based on current forecasts, a reserve claim is not required this year. Does that mean that we're seeing a levelling off of claims in relation to hearing loss?
Yes, there are still a number of claims in the system. But for the past number of years, we have seen the number of claims settled exceed the number of new claims received, and that will continue throughout the rest of this year. So Police's latest estimate is that they will settle approximately £12 million or so of cases this year. That £12 million is in Police's budget, therefore a top-up, to put it that way, from Treasury's reserve won't be required this year.
Yes, and would you anticipate that 12 million would decline as well?
I think from what we have seen of Police's forecast spend for next year, it's unlikely that hearing loss costs will exceed 12 million. So I think that the trajectory we're on will continue.
Yes.
Whether or not it's less than 12 million, I think still remains to be seen. But I wouldn't expect it to be more than 12 million next year.
Yes.
And obviously, as time goes on, it will taper down.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Chair.
Sammy?
Thank you, Chair. And thanks very much for the presentation. Glenn, I think at the last meeting we raised concerns about the adequacy of the probation board funding, and certainly if you look at the board's savings delivery plan, we've also had to deal with a rising workload, including a substantial increase in the number of offenders to be monitored or managed in the community. And I know you had mentioned about, I think you had spoken or you had met with the probation board. Can you give us an assurance today of those discussions that particularly violent sex offenders and violent offenders will be monitored and managed, that there won't be any shortcuts? Because we're talking about the safety of communities here in that sense.
Indeed, I suppose what I can, or what I should say firstly, is that the operational aspect to that will be for the probation board, obviously, to work through. From a financial perspective, the department has done what it can to protect the probation board as much as possible this year. So just looking down the figures, their savings target this year is 5.6%, which compared to other areas is significantly less. So from that aspect, the department has tried to protect probation board as much as possible this year.
But you do
and
recognise
next
the
year.
growing workload, and particularly of monitoring and managing offenders within the community?
I absolutely accept your point. And yes, as we said when we talked about 15-16, there will no doubt be frontline impacts across the justice sector. The Justice Minister's aim will be to minimise that as far as possible, and that will be reflected in the budget that the probation board will receive.
Second, I don't think you've mentioned it, but in terms of the Desert Creek easement, will this be lost or could it be reallocated to another project?
Well, in terms of where we are on Desert Creek funding, underspends from previous years have built up in an end-year flexibility pot in Treasury. That currently totals £78 million. Under the terms of the 4-year budget deal that we're currently in, the arrangement with Treasury was that those underspends could be rolled forward and used in the current 4-year period that runs out on the 31st of March this year. So in terms of the underspend this year, as I said in my comments, we'll be working with DFP and we take their view on what's the best way to use this year's underspends. And I suppose that comes down to either using them elsewhere across the block or else adding to the end-year flexibility pot with the risk that the deal runs out this year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Raymond.
Thank you very much. Just in relation to the, I just note that there is hearing loss claims now coming from the prison service. Are they of a similar nature to the PSNI hearing?
In terms of the reason for
Yeah.
them, so yes, that's my understanding.
Is it in relation to firearms training?
That's correct.
I mean, you would expect it won't be as high.
Yes,
So it's-
I am. Well, it won't, because I think we're talking about a very much smaller population in terms of officers.
In terms of, in a number of the presentations that we've received over the years, I mean, the case was always made about trying to settle these as a collective. Now, the department at the time gave a reason for the reason why they were done individually. Would they have changed their mind on that now that it's coming to the end, nearly of the claims against former members of the RUC, and perhaps applying it to the prison? Because like what always struck us was that on average the claim seemed to be nearly a three-way split, for want of better words. The person involved, the legal cost and the medical costs were remarkably the same. Is there anything that the department can do in terms of a collective approach for this for the future, particularly now they're coming from the prison service?
I think a number of aspects to that. As you say, hopefully we're seeing maybe not the tail end, but certainly the trend going down. As to whether the approach is the right one, I think we got to also bear in mind the affordability of doing a class action. To take that number of cases and to fund them in a limited period of time would obviously create a very large pressure. The current course of action is based on legal advice, and the legal advice was and is that it is better to run through the current process. In relation to the split of costs, it was originally approximately 50-50. It's important to note that the 50% fees and costs wasn't just legal costs, that was medical costs and so on factored in there. And I think over time, as the process has become more efficient, if that's the right phrase, the percentage of those costs has been reducing. So I think where we are now, and based on legal advice, how the department has dealt with that is still the right course of action.
Okay. In terms, in the phrase was used that the PSNI had no additional pressures. Can you just explain that out? Where they had no additional pressures? Was that as a result of no shortfalls on their?
What I'm suggesting there, what that means is that as part of the January monitoring round, the position for the police going into that was the outcome of the October round, which saw cuts to the police and also an additional allocation. So in assessing that budget and the requirements for the rest of the year, police didn't come back with any pressures. So they're planning to live within the funding that they have got this year.
In terms of, I mean, from the column, from the table provided, number 6 it deals with impact. But it's interesting in the box, it's any adverse impact. You know, because it's perhaps, and this picture now is, that hasn't the recent round of budget requirements put on the agencies, but in terms of any impact and any adverse impact, what would the difference be?
It's fair to say that the savings delivery pack you have is based on figures at the end of September.
No,
The extra cuts aren't through there.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that all areas of the justice system, including the police, have said that because of this year's cuts, and also, maybe more importantly, the cuts facing the department next year, that there will be frontline impacts. So I would expect when we come back after March next year with the updated savings delivery plans, that some of those will no doubt show that there has been a frontline impact.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just this sort of, it's, anybody who has a budget cut, if there's no frontline service impact, then, you can sort of say, right, what was being done before perhaps was inefficient, and I'm not being pejorative by saying that. But when you see that sort of change, the adverse impact, you can see where you might have an impact in the frontline service, but adverse could be something really critical. I'm just wondering for the next round, just to know what the threshold is, so we have a better understanding of, what has been hit. Because we've had a discussion here before, smaller projects may not be getting their money. The department might say it's having no frontline service impact or no adverse, but it might be having an impact, and we need to just sort of ascertain that as we go forward.
I think it's absolutely acceptable. I think it's worthwhile noting as well that the detail in those savings delivery plans are prepared by the bodies themselves, so that's police's assessment.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to get this clear, you're surrendering £5.5 million in this monitoring round, and then also on top of that, £7.1 million that was directly attributed to the District Creek Safety College. Is that correct?
In terms of capital funding, that's correct.
Capital funding, and that's going back to the centre.
That's going back to the centre.
Amounts. What are we like resource? Are we easing anything on resource?
No, in terms of resource, we aren't submitting any bids to DLP, but nor are we declaring any easements. So after October monitoring, taking into account some additional funding, that budget that the department has, we plan to live within this year.
With regards to the frontline services that are the likes of the Railway Street Drug Arrest Referral and Harm Reduction Service, which is in Ballymena, what budget does that come out of? Is that resource or capital?
That's resource.
Resource. And yet funding is closing for that, or stopping for that, at the end of January, at this present time. But yet you didn't see fit, as a department, to even bid in a monitoring round for funding that would keep that valuable service open, and which would actually save the department money, both in prison numbers and in crime rates, and also have a massive burden, will have a massive burden on our health service.
In relation to the department's position about bidding to DFP, we should remember that the department over this current 4-year budget period is ring-fenced. Now, at the start of the budget period, that meant that we were allocated our budget and asked to live within that, and therefore not bid to DFP and the executive for additional funding in year. That slightly changed in the middle of this year, because obviously the in-year cuts required at executive level, and some additional funding for specific pressures meant that ring fence was temporarily lifted or broken. The department, however, enters the end of this year as a ring-fence department, so we wouldn't be expected to put bids to the DFP in relation to the specific project you're talking about. Within our ring-fence budget, I'm aware that the department is still considering options for funding in relation to that specific project.
But you talked about a principle there of not bidding because, and I can understand, there's an agreement that your budget was ring-fenced, so you're protected in that regard, so you shouldn't really be asking for any more money. But surely when that principle has already been broken, the monitoring round before, and given the fact that this can be proven to actually save the department money, surely it's within yourselves to actually bid for this, knowing that it's an invest to save, going to save the department money. So it's actually quite arguable that what you're bidding for will prevent you from bidding again in the future.
Well, where we are with that project is that there are still options and potential income streams available to the department from within its ring-fence budget, and we need to exhaust those first before we would submit a bid.
But is that just simply talk? Because, or is this nothing to do with money whatsoever? Is this more of a fundamental principle that officials within the Department of Justice don't think that they should be funding this service at all? It should all come from the health service. We're just simply going to walk away, hoping that maybe the Department of Health will pick it up?
No, I don't think that's a fair assessment. When the decision was taken, it was obviously taken in the context of significant cuts facing the department. Said before, there will no doubt be frontline impacts across the justice system. And if we choose to not fund or to fund particular areas, those decisions have to be taken from within one overall funding envelope. But to come back to my point, my understanding is that there are still funding streams that are being explored for that particular project in year.
We talked about it the last time you were here, Glenn. We talked about the cost of a prisoner in Northern Ireland, and we talked, and I wasn't going to hold you to figures because I'm not like that. I'm fair, but it was around 70,000. We had assumed. Have you got any further information on that as to the cost of a prisoner?
Yeah, the cost per prisoner placed, I think I said 60,000 at the time. It was actually 63, so weren't too far off. But yes, the cost per prisoner placed is about £63,000 a year. Now, there are lots of caveats and so on around that. There's a number of fixed costs and so on. So by adding or taking away one prisoner, you don't automatically add or subtract £63,000 from the prison's running cost.
Yeah, and I would take that. But are you aware of a briefing fact file from Bromley? Bromley Briefings prison fact file from the autumn of 2013, which suggests that it's actually £16,000 higher per prisoner.
So, well, I'm not aware of the briefing. What was the figure you quoted, sorry?
Sorry, it's £16,000 higher than the 63.
That the Northern Ireland Prison Service cost per prisoner place. Yeah. I'm not sure what date that figure was struck on. I do know that the cost per prisoner place for the Northern Ireland Prison Service was historically higher and has come down to a range of savings measures, the staff exit scheme being one. So I need to know what date that figure was produced. But from prison service colleagues, the current cost is £63,000.
So I don't have any more information, but I'm quoting from the Bromley Briefings Prison Fact File, autumn 2013, just for your own references. Why I ask that question is simply because if we lose this drug addiction service, there is no doubt there'll be more people in prison, which will be a burden to the public pound, and will also impact greatly on our GP surgeries who are ill-equipped to cope, and also our hospitals, which again puts a burden on the public purse and the public pound. But yet we're in a position where this is going to close beginning of February. And again, I would appeal to this committee, because I know it's part of the committee submission to the Finance Committee, that the Justice Department do everything they can within their gift to try and seek funding for this and other services like that, which are Invest to Save and which will save the taxpayer money in the long run. Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Thank you, Chair. Glenn, just two questions. You touched briefly on the prison officer scheme.
Can we just find out now, is that now come to an end?
Yes, that's come to an end. 520 officers left, the final 12 leaving in the first quarter of this financial year.
Yeah.
So yes, there are no more exit scheme costs associated with that.
And is the scheme now closed?
Yes, the scheme's now closed.
The scheme.
Is my understanding. I know
Yeah.
all the officers have left who applied.
Yes.
Whether technically the scheme's closed or not, I'm not sure. But yes, everybody who applied to leave has
And
now
if it
gone.
hasn't, do you anticipate that there is a closing date for it?
I would need to find that out from prison service colleagues. My assumption is that because all those who applied to leave have now been allowed to leave, that it's closed.
And should there be a voluntary redundancy scheme across the public sector, would that be anticipated to be better than or not as good as this exit scheme?
I don't know what the terms of any proposed
I don't
exit
think any of us
scheme
do,
will be, so I wouldn't like to comment on that. What I do know is that there were additional benefits to this
Yes.
particular staff exit scheme.
Unlikely.
I wouldn't like to comment, but we'll have to see what the more general one looks like.
Okay. Can we turn just briefly to the Youth Justice Agency and a comment in their key risks, which says that the overall levels have increased and exceeded budget due to an increase in the number of young people with difficult behaviours at the Juvenile Justice Centre and facilities. And that is currently being met by overtime due to the lack of staff. What efforts can be made to address that? Because there's a limit to the amount of overtime that people doing professional jobs like that can actually sustain in terms of the quality of the service which they deliver. It's a bit like back to the previous question. If you can't deliver the quality service to the people in need, then you get spillover elsewhere.
I am aware that in terms of this year and in relation to the efficiencies required next year, that work is ongoing to look at the overall staffing structures and complements within the Youth Justice Agency. I imagine that will be with a view to reducing overtime as far as possible. But I think that will be in the context of looking at the overall staffing structures and staffing regime.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's it.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and congratulations. It's good to see you with us here. If I could move just between the two documents, then please, just if that's okay with you, Chair. Could I just find out from you, back on to my own patch here, the Desert Crate project, and whatever that's happening on that, but financially, the issue was the surrender of 7.1 million off the project, and the department were to engage with Department of Finance personnel around determination of the easement and how it could be treated, because we're coming quite close to that end of year, which could be the determining factor as to whether you hold on to it or not. So how are things going along there? I know I raised it, must be about, 2 or 3 weeks ago now. So presumably there's been some form of engagement with DFP in the interlude. How are things coming along with them on that front and with the Treasury, I suppose?
In terms of progress on that, in relation to the easement that's reflected in your paper,
Yes.
We'll formally be submitting that to DFP following today's committee briefing. In relation to the overall issue about Desert Crate funding for
Yes.
future years, DFP sit on the college steering group, so we're very aware of the figures and the risks involved. I don't know, and I would need to speak to DFP colleagues about where discussions specifically are with Treasury, but I do know as part of the overall 15-16 budget discussions that forms part of their negotiations with Treasury, but I'm not sure specifically where those have got
Yeah,
to.
can you clarify that for me, please, because it's a very important issue. Like, if it comes 31st of March 2015 and all goes bang, well then we're into an even worse scenario than what we're in at the moment.
Oh,
If you could please, Chair, with your permission. And then, picking up on a theme that Paul was developing there, I've looked at your documentation on the mission values from DOJ, but particularly around the whole issue of the promotion and contribution to safer communities through partnership, working with statutory organisation, communities, third sector and businesses and that. Now, and basically to the rehabilitation of offenders to have a prison delivery model that is capable of withstanding changes in both prisoner population size and needs. Now, could I take maybe the specific example of NIACRO? Now, I think there's about 400,000 of core funding, I think, goes over from the department to NIACRO. But aside from that core funding and how it could be potentially jeopardised, are you aware that that's used as a lever to draw in, I think it's about 3.6 million of other fundings? In other words, you're aware of it, you're the finance people. You go to external bodies, various other agencies and funding bodies, and you say to them, okay, please provide me the money. And the very first question, or the second question maybe that they ask is, okay, who else is funding? So therefore, I'm concerned, one, that potentially their funding could be jeopardised, and two, that that lever that the core funding from the department provides could in fact jeopardise additional external fundings. Now, that's before we actually come on to the role that they play. And it's, as I see it, and Paul was touching upon it there, the role that they play, and I've seen some of their work and listened to some of their work, in keeping people out of prison, getting people back into work. Now, I think one of their programmes may not be directly funded by yourselves, but it's the employability programme. The reconviction rate for people who engage in that one is 23% compared to the double of it for those who don't. So, say we remove that programme, you're looking at more people who are going to end up in jail, and you're back to the 63,000 per capita and the pressures that are going on there. So, I'm looking at this and I'm saying you could be penny wise and pound foolish in a big way, not only just for the pressures that would put on the system, the prison system, the probation service, indeed on wider agencies such as health and some of the employment, social security agency and those. It seems to me a very tricky situation, particularly with regard to that organisation. One, their role and what they do, and two, potentially the levers that the department, through its investment, places at their disposal to draw down other funding. Can you have a look at that one, please? Because I'm really concerned about that.
Do you want me to comment on that?
Please do.
I think you're absolutely right. Those are the sorts of issues that we're having to grapple with. As context, the department is facing, as a starting point, 15% cuts, albeit there's £70 million of funding from the executive. And when we allocate a significant amount of that towards police, you can see that the percentage cuts across the rest of the department will be big. Some of that voluntary and community sector funding that you've talked about flows through the likes of the prison service and the probation board. And you're quite right, there are invest to save elements to that and match funding elements to it. In relation to protecting the front line, if we use the example of the prison service, our draft budget has prison service savings of 8.7% next year, which are significantly less than most other bits of the department. So that is with a view to try and protect the prison service, the bodies it funds and so on. So those are exactly the sorts of issues we're working through. I, for example, am going to meet with NICFA and other DOJ officials are coming along next week, so we can have a good consultation and engagement with the voluntary and community sector. But implicit in trying to protect the front line as far as possible, that you'll see in the percentage savings, is also trying to protect that funding to that sector as far as possible.
Appreciate it, but in their particular role, given what they do and given the nature of their activities, it's all about rehabilitation, keeping people out of prison and giving them new opportunities in their lives. And my concern is that if they're basically scuppered financially, you're going to have more pressures on police, prisons, probation service, and you're going to have additional, without any doubt, given the costs that you provided to us there of the 63,000 per capita in the prison, you're going to have additional costs there. And I really think that there needs to be some reflection done on that, because you could be in that area of penny wise and pound foolish longer term and really be back to us. with figures showing increase in prison population, increase in difficulties and pressures on police service, and it being an extremely difficult situation all around. So can you reflect on that one and get back to us on it, please, Chair, with your permission?
Absolutely, we will.
Yes, thank you.
Tom?
Thank you, Chair. And also congratulations to yourself from me. Thanks very much for the briefing. Apologies, I missed the start of it. Can I just ask for clarification on a couple of issues, Chair? One is the target of 135 million. Is that for this year of efficiency savings? Is that for 14-15?
So where you picking that figure up from?
I think it's page 90 on errors, I think. I don't know what it is in here.
Is that in the savings delivery
Yeah,
pack?
it is.
The total savings figure relates to savings the department is due to make by 31st of March 2015.
Yeah, and I noticed that you were running behind the current target. I think it was 108 million, whereas you're sitting at 103.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Where do you anticipate that shortfall to be made up?
It's important to note that although there is presentationally a shortfall, that doesn't mean that we are going to breach our budget by that amount. The shortfall has arisen because the cost of the prison service exit scheme were higher than planned. Because more officers have left, it gets more savings out in the longer run. The department did receive some extra funding from the executive earlier in the budget period that funded those additional costs. So the budget pressure, if you like, has been met, but presentationally there will be a shortfall. So that's the first answer, or the first part of the answer. Second part is that when we update these plans as of the 31st of March next year, we will no doubt see more savings reflected in them because we've had to make more savings in this financial year. So I expect that by March 15, when we're back up to give you the final update, that we will have hit our target.
I think that was my point. Where do you see those savings, those additional savings? Because, and I'm just trying to get it around my head, are you saying then that even though in the presentation there is a shortfall, that there will not be a shortfall?
Well, if we look at it on a gross basis and strip out the extra cost of the prison service exit scheme, we would have delivered our gross savings target. But when you factor in the extra cost of the scheme that were separately funded to a degree by the executive, that shows that for that element the costs are greater than the savings, which tips it over and shows a deficit. If you stripped out that extra funding and those extra costs, we would have exceeded our gross savings target.
Okay. And because that funding for that exit scheme came from the executive, then that will not be your responsibility to find that, is it?
Well, it means that in order to fund those extra costs, we haven't got a budget deficit elsewhere in the department because a separate funding stream was made available for those.
Okay, and that will not come out of next year's budget?
No. What we will see in relation to the exit scheme is recurring savings after that initial upfront investment.
That was all, Chair, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is everyone then happy enough? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, members, are there any issues we want to seek more information on, or are we content?
Chair, as long as the specific issues that were outlined
Raised.
there, if they get back to us, you know. Thank you.
Okay, move on to agenda item 5 then. DOJ consultation on the 15-16 draft budget proposals. Refer to page 125 through to 139 of your packs. You'll recall at the meeting of the 26th of November, the committee received an oral briefing from the department officials on the DOJ draft 15-16 budget and key priorities. The committee subsequently agreed last week a response on the draft budget proposals for inclusion in the report being compiled by the Committee for Finance and Personnel. The department has now provided a copy of the consultation document on its 15-16 draft budget proposals. However, the detailed spending savings plan for each area, which will outline the impact on the budget proposals, are not yet available. Can I make a proposal that we request that the Minister will attend a meeting in January to discuss the 15-16 budget proposal once the consultation's been completed? Happy enough? Okay. Move on to agenda item 6 then. There's an update on the Desert Crete project, referring to pages 141 through to 166 of your packs. The Minister attended the meeting on the 11th of November and outlined the current position regarding Desert Crete. At that stage, the committee was advised that the steering group had concluded it would not be prudent to press ahead with the current project given the number of uncertainties and high exposure to risk, and that a two-stage review will be undertaken, with the first stage establishing what the present position means for the current procurement process. The Minister has now written indicating that the first stage has been completed, and based on advice from the Programme Board and the Centre for Procurement Excellence, the Project Steering Group has concluded that the current procurement process should not be discontinued at this stage. The Minister has also provided the terms of reference for Stage 2 of the review, which will re-examine the training requirements for 3 services and bring forward options and recommendations as to what is appropriate, affordable and deliverable in the current budgetary climate and the timescale for completion of the work. The Programme Board's Communication Group has also agreed to develop and implement a plan for improving communication with stakeholders, and in particular local communities and their representatives, following the difficulties with inaccurate media reporting in relation to the project. Are we happy to note the current position of the Desert Crete project and ensure that we get regular updates that will continue to be scheduled into our
It'll be
work
very
programme?
important.
Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, happy with that approach. Just wondering, in light of the Minister's letter, and you did quote the bit at the bottom of that first page, steering group concluded that the current procurement process should not be discontinued at this stage. Wondering, could we get any more detail on that?
Okay.
As to why and, you know, what they actually looked at.
Rationale for it.
And it's just, we don't want the entire report from them, but at least if we had a bit more detail as to why, so that we can track it better at every stage, that's all.
Sure. Happy enough for that, yeah. Okay. Move on to agenda item 7. It's an SL1. Refer you to pages 168 to 191 of your folders. The Department of Justice is proposing to bring forward a statutory rule to fulfil its obligations under the 2014 Public Service Pensions Act to establish a career average revalued earnings pension scheme for the devolved judiciary. The Department must make both scheme regulations, the draft Judicial Pensions Regulations Northern Ireland 2015, which will set out the mechanics of the care scheme, and an order, the draft Public Service Pensions Act Northern Ireland 2014, specification of holders of Judicial Office Order Northern Ireland 2015, specifying which judicial office holders are eligible to join the scheme. Responsibility for the devolved judiciary is a matter for a number of departments, including DEL and DSD, and the Department of Justice officials have worked closely with officials in both of those departments on the reform of judicial pensions. The regulations are very closely modelled on those to be made by the Department of Finance and Personnel for Civil Servants and by the Ministry of Justice for the non-devolved judiciary. The scheme regulations are subject to the draft affirmative assembly procedure, whilst the order is subject to the negative resolution procedure. The scheme regulations also require the consent of the Department of Finance and Personnel. Can I ask if members are content with the proposed statutory rule, or whether they want to get further information either in written form or by way of oral briefing? Any views? Okay. Agenda item 8, Programme for Government, update on commitments. Refer to pages 193 to 201 of the meeting folder. And the Department of Justice have provided an update on progress in relation to the 7 commitments for which it has responsibility in the Programme for Government. 4 of the 7 commitments have been assessed as on track to be delivered. 2 are broadly on track and 1 is not on track, namely the Desert Crete Training College project that we've mentioned before, in which we've had the committee's had a briefing on that as well and looked at that earlier. Can I get the views of members on whether they're content to note the progress report in relation to the department, or whether any further information is required, again, either in written format or by way of oral briefing?
Chair, can I suggest maybe write and ask for the levels of serious crime at the end of this, if it's possible, in this year? I just heard someone on this morning saying that, which is true, that the levels of crime in Northern Ireland are much lower than the rest of the United Kingdom. So it would just, as an item of information, really.
Yeah, happy to do that, yeah. Anything else? Anyone else has? No? Okay. Move on then to agenda item 9, update on the DOJ legislative programme. Refer to pages 203 to 217. The Department has provided an update on the primary and subordinate legislation it intends to bring forward during the current mandate. The timings of the Fines and Enforcement Bill and the Mental Capacity Bill have now slipped until March-April 2015 instead of October and January respectively, as previously had been indicated. Are we content to note the Department of Justice planned legislative programme, or is any further information required? Happy to note? Okay. Agenda item 10 then is proposed creation of a new criminal offence. Refer you to pages 219 through to 240 of your folders. At the meeting on the 10th of September, the committee noted that the department had written to a range of key stakeholders seeking initial views on a proposal to introduce legislation to create an offence of police corruption for PSNI officers, similar to that that is currently being introduced by the Home Secretary in England and Wales. The committee agreed to consider the matter further when the responses were available. The new offence is intended to supplement the existing offence of misconduct in public office, and its scope is wider than that of the existing offence as it applies specifically to any improper use of an officer's powers or privileges that it intends to give rise to a benefit or detriment. The Department has now provided a summary of the responses to the consultation. The DPP, PSNI, Police Ombudsman and the Policing Board are broadly in support of the extent of the new offence to Northern Ireland. The Police Federation and Superintendents Association are not supportive, highlighting the oversight regime for policing in Northern Ireland is very extensive. It's not clear what the new offence will cover. That's not already covered by current criminal offences, and the catalyst for the new offence in England and Wales was very specific concerns in that jurisdiction that are not relevant, they claim, to Northern Ireland. Having considered the arguments for and against, the Minister has indicated that he is minded to maintain parity on this issue and introduce a new offence of police corruption in Northern Ireland, but before coming to a final decision on the matter, he would like the views of the committee on the way forward. Members, with your indulgence, given that I've only been made aware of this sort of half an hour before the committee met, when I was officially took over, I would propose that we maybe put this back to January and give us a little bit more time to consider it. If members are happy enough with that, yeah.
Chair, again, sorry, just one query. Maybe we could follow up in the meantime that I picked up on. And that is that HMRC and Port Police aren't included within it. And maybe we could get a bit more explanation on that as to why. You'll find that on page Christine's help.
And Chair, I was just going to check
Page 221 of our pack.
Okay. Good. Okay, we'll try to find clarification on that. Yeah, that's fine. Sammy?
I know the Minister says about he's minded to maintain parity. Are there financial implications for this if we go against this? How often this comes up with welfare reform and other things as well? Maybe that's one question. Maybe ask if he does.
We'll seek some clarification on that too. Is that okay? Okay, members? Okay, then move on to agenda item 11. Refer to pages 242 to 261 of your packs. The Attorney General is required under Section 8 of the Justice Northern Ireland Act to issue guidance to named criminal justice organisations on the exercise of their functions in a manner consistent with international human rights standards. The Attorney General has now provided the draft guidance he has prepared for the Probation Board for Northern Ireland for consideration by the committee. In preparing the guidance, the Attorney General's staff have liaised with the Probation Board officials and, where possible, incorporated suggestions into the guidance. Can I get the view of members on whether they are content with the Attorney General's draft human rights guidance for the Probation Board, or whether they wish to submit any comments or require any further information, either from the Probation Board or from the Attorney General? Content?
Yes.
Okay, and then once the guidelines are finished then, or finalised, the Attorney General will lay the draft guidance in the Assembly and provide the Committee with details of the proposed statutory rule that it will bring into operation. Okay? Agenda item 12 then is fine enforcement and fine default, an update following judgment and judicial review cases. Refer you to pages 263 through to 277 of your packs. The Department of Justice has provided an update on developments following the judgment delivered by the Divisional Court in 5 judicial reviews, referred to as McLaren judgment, relating to the arrangements for imposing and enforcing fines and other monetary penalties. The briefing paper outlines the current position in relation to the Department's fine collection and enforcement programme to manage the outworkings of the judgment, and includes a summary of the default hearings that have taken place in both the Crown Court and the Magistrates' Courts, and the number of cases in which payment has been made in full, in part, or cleared by notional payment. The Department has also indicated that the Divisional Court's findings that the warrants in the 5 cases before it were unlawfully issued could potentially give rise to compensation claims from people committed to prison for non-payment of a fine or other monetary penalty. The 5 cases have been listed for further preliminary hearing on the 19th of December 2014, but no date has been set for a substantive hearing, and liability will be disputed. Assessment of the extent of potential liability is difficult, and pending the determination of the 5 test cases, it is not practicable to forecast the level of damages that could accrue. The PAC considered the Northern Ireland Audit Office report on the Courts and Tribunal Service Trust Statements at its meeting of the 22nd of October, and departmental officials attended to give evidence. Issues covered included the potential loss of monies to the Consolidated Fund, the progress of legislative changes to reform fine enforcement, potential damages claims, and an ongoing criminal prosecution of a police officer in relation to potential fraud of warrant monies. The PAC report is likely to be published in early January 2015, and the Department will have a month to formally respond to the findings. Can I ask members to note the current position in relation to the fine enforcement and fine default, and whether members wish any further information at this stage? Happy just to note. Okay. We'll maybe ask for a little bit more information just in terms of the extent of the unpaid fines and the likely amount that will not be recovered, and issues like that. So if we maybe write and get some more information, that might be quite useful. Move on then to agenda item 13, is an update on the Department of Justice Estate Strategy. Refer you to pages 279 to 282 of the meeting folder. The Department has provided a written update on its estate strategy, which covers all the Department's core directorates, executive agencies and non-departmental public bodies. The Department has outlined the current position on the 2 projects that make up the strategy. In relation to the Department Headquarters Accommodation Project, a draft business case has been completed to assess accommodation options, which include Belfast, Stormont and elsewhere in Northern Ireland. However, it's too early to determine what the final outcome will be, and any change will be subject to securing the necessary funding. The Service Delivery Accommodation Project is at an earlier stage, with a series of workshops being held to identify service delivery accommodation requirements, and a final report due by the end of 2014-15. Can we note the current position in relation to the Department's estate strategy, unless anybody wants any further information? Okay. Move on then to agenda item 14, EU Justice and Home Affairs Biannual Report. Refer you to pages 284 through to 330 of the meeting papers. Just remind the committee that we had written to the Department of Justice in June 2013 to outline its key EU priority issues relevant to justice and home affairs, and requested regular updates on these issues from the Department of Justice, including specific information on the likely implications and impact for Northern Ireland of each proposal to enable it to monitor developments. The Department has now provided the Committee with the Winter 2014 EU Justice and Home Affairs Biannual Report, which summarises the current position in relation to the EU measures being dealt with by the Department, the known impact for Northern Ireland and the next steps to be taken. The update outlines that in relation to progress to accessing EU funding streams, the PSNI successfully scored high enough to be placed on a reserve list for funding to conduct research into human trafficking, and it has also submitted 2 applications to lead on Horizon 2020 projects. The results of the bids will be known early in the new year. The Department has also provided a copy of the strategic guidelines for legislative and operational planning for justice and home affairs for the next 5 years, which will form the post-Stockholm Programme 2015 to 2020 and will inform the Justice and Home Affairs Work Programme for 2015. As the new Commissioner only took up office on the 1st of November of this year, the preparation and publication of the next Work Programme has been delayed. The Committee will wish to consider its European priorities for 2015 once that Work Programme is available. So can I ask the Committee just to note the EU Justice and Home Affairs Biannual Report, unless anybody has any further information they require?
Chair, can I just ask a question? It talks here about the PSNI has also submitted 2 applications in August to lead on Horizon 2020 projects. and results of the bids will be known early in the new year. Is there any way we get some information, because involved in the Enterprise Committee,
Yep.
it's a huge fund,
Yep.
and certainly in terms of Northern Ireland Republic of Ireland, we were a good bit behind in terms of proposals and applications. Could we find out if there are any similar proposals included for the Garda Síochána, as an example, and where do we fit relating to north-south?
Sure, okay. Try to find out more information on that, that's fine, yep. Okay. Agenda item 15 then is an update on judicial pension reform and the O'Brien litigation. Refer you to pages 332 through to 344 of the meeting folder of the relevant papers. The Department had planned to update the Committee on the position on the O'Brien litigation, which relates to pension and other benefits for fee-paid judiciary under the EU Part-Time Workers Directive, following a case management discussion scheduled to take place before the Northern Ireland Industrial Tribunal on the 23rd of October 2014. The tribunal was postponed, however, until February 2015 to allow more time to see how the O'Brien litigation progresses in GB. Therefore, the Department has provided an update that was issued to claimants on the developments thus far. In preparation for the February 2015 case management discussion, the Department will continue to work with other departments to coordinate the management of claims, liaise closely with the Ministry of Justice on the progress of the O'Brien litigation in GB, and assess whether it is in a position to make statements as to what steps it intends to take in response to the judgment so far. So can I ask the Committee just to note the current position regarding the O'Brien litigation, unless anybody wants any further information? Happy to note. Okay, then if we move on to agenda item 16, which is correspondence. There are 7 items of correspondence, pages 346 through to 440, and there are 5 items at pages 5 to 4 of the tabled papers. I'll draw attention to some of the items, and then if anybody has any other issues they want to raise and other stuff, they can do so. Item 3 at pages 353 and 354 of the folder. A response from the Northern Ireland Prison Service providing further information on the number of prisoner on prisoner assaults in each prison in the last 6 years and the gender breakdown of the 90% of prisoners that suffer from mental health issues, as reported in the Criminal Justice Inspection and the Regulation and Quality Improvement Authority following the oral briefing back on the 22nd of October 2014. Can we note that correspondence, or unless anybody wishes for any further clarification? Happy to note. Okay, item 6 at pages 362 to 415. The Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland report on a review of the governance, delivery and outcomes of the policing and community safety partnerships. The report was emailed to members on the 4th of December. The Department has scheduled an oral briefing on the findings and recommendations of the report for our meeting on the 21st of January. Would you also, the Committee also want to have a briefing by the Chief Inspector Brendan McGuigan prior to the departmental briefing? Yeah? Enough to arrange that, okay. And then item 1 on pages 7 to 8 of the tabled pack that you have. It's an invitation to the book launch, Policing in Northern Ireland Delivering a New Beginning by Des Ray and Robin Macefield in the Riddle Hall on Tuesday the 16th of December at 5 p.m. Just if anyone wants to attend that, if they just let the clerk know and she can advise that you'll be attending. Item 2, pages 10 and 11 of the tabled pack. It's correspondence from the PSNI providing information in response to requests from the Committee on the firearms engagement meetings. The police have advised that the meeting, which was scheduled to take place in January, has now been cancelled as the Chair is unable to attend, and instead an update meeting with a member of the group will take place in January, with another engagement meeting to be convened in March. The PSNI has confirmed that the members of the Justice Committee are welcome to attend either or both meetings, and again, if anybody wishes to attend those, if they just let the clerk know and she can make arrangements.
Sorry, what are the dates again, honestly, there, please?
It was January and March they're looking to have.
All right.
No more specifics on that, but we can find that out for you. Okay. Are we happy then to action the correspondence as outlined in the meeting folder and table pack?
Chair, Chair, sorry again. Item 2 of the correspondence is obviously we've been copied in just in a letter from the Department of Justice to the Evangelical Alliance around the issue of abortion. I notice in today's media the matter of Human Rights Commission, I think it is, taking a legal case. Just wondering would it be in our interest, not making any proposal, but I'm just wondering, would it be in our interest at some time to get a briefing on that? Maybe from the Human Rights Commission to hear their thoughts on it? And maybe from the department as well. I'm only putting it out there for consideration, not making a proposal.
Yeah, either of you are happy enough with that suggestion, yeah?
You would assume that part of our evidence gathering, they will be in front of us?
Yeah. Yes, they are.
I would agree
That might
with,
resolve it.
I would agree with Mr. McCartney. I mean, they did touch on this last week, but they didn't specifically say that they were intent on bringing an action. That was my understanding.
Yeah,
They said
apologies.
that in the event of, in the event of there being no legislation or legislation that was passed by the Assembly or failed to pass the Assembly, they might bring an action then. But they didn't say we will be going to the court in order to test the law in Northern Ireland. That was my understanding. Unless I'm wrong, Chair.
What we could do is we could write to the department and see whether or not they were in receipt of a letter indicating that they were intent on challenging this. And then if we get a response back from the department.
Yeah,
then
it
we
seems to have come as a little blurry somewhat, just Chair, that's all.
could- Yeah.
Obviously, I missed last week, so apologies for that, but, I do understand that there was no clear indication that,
Well, they did say they'd written to the department in relation to the issue of abortion. I don't think we saw that letter.
No.
It was
I heard
referred
it this morning. I heard Edmundum. That was the only knowledge I had of it.
Yeah. Maybe if we got a copy of their letter to the department, I think that might be helpful.
We can do that. Edwin, yeah?
Yeah, just on the issue, I think the Human Rights Commission have shown huge contempt for this committee in the first instance. So they came here last week and they didn't indicate that a decision on this was imminent. Now, we are in a consultation process and, that consultation process involves the Human Rights Commission, it involves the public, but in many senses they're saying, you know what, it doesn't really matter what the public think, it doesn't matter what Stormont thinks, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, we're going to go to the courts and create the legislation ourselves and by that means. And I think the Human Rights Commission have a very important role. And should the Assembly pass legislation which they believe isn't human rights compliant, then they have that authority and remit to actually challenge it in the courts. But I think whenever you're actually creating policy and setting policy, they are advisors in that instance, and they should not be taking this out of the hands of the democratic process. I think the Human Rights Commission need to answer a number of questions. First of all, I assume they hadn't made the decision last week. Mr. Allenby, to me, was pretty clear that from what he was saying that they hadn't made a decision at that point. So I assume that was. When did they make the decision?
Yeah.
What was it planned at last? That this was going to be an issue for discussion at a Human Rights Commission in the very near future, and why did Mr. Allenby not tell us that? So I would like to know that from the Human Rights Commission. And I think that we as a committee need to be very publicly clear and vocal, and I think the Minister has spoken on this issue as well, that we take our role very seriously. We're dealing with a hugely sensitive issue. We want to deal with it correctly. There's a public consultation process taking place, and everyone should show respect on this issue, and we should particularly show respect to the public and allow them to engage in the public consultation process before anything happens. And I would like to see the committee actually making a statement, because to me this is about protecting democracy. What's the point in having a democratic institution if the courts are going to make the laws for us? And this is another case where the Human Rights Commissioner stepping in, saying, you know what, we don't trust Minister Ford to make the law, we don't trust him to bring the right legislation to this Assembly. I mightn't agree with what Minister Ford brings to the Assembly, but nonetheless, I'll make my case on the floor of the Assembly on that, and we'll have a vote on it and decide the way forward. It's not for the courts to come in when due process is taking place in something like this.
No, I would tend to concur with that. If members are content, then we'll write to both the department and the human rights people and try to get some information on some of the points that everyone's made. If members are content that we draft that, perhaps it would be useful if we share that with members before that's sent off, just to make sure that everybody's...
Because their position wasn't clear. No, it wasn't. No, our people were speculating on their behalf this morning, so I think it's fair to write and ask them to lay out their case, because they may make the perfect case, or they may make an imperfect case, but I don't think we should prejudge it.
Sure.
Chair, if they have launched proceedings, can we also seek appropriate guidance as to where that sits in terms of agency and indeed anyone's right to comment on this matter? Have they effectively, thrown a spanner in the works as a result of that action?
Yeah, no, I suspect there will be issues that will be raised.
So it would be helpful if we were briefed in respect of those issues.
Yeah, that's fine.
Chair, I heard Edmund on this morning on Radio Ulster, and he was asked about the Human Rights Commission. I also mentioned a number of other bodies who, the likes of the Attorney General, who give us advice, and others. I'm not on the committee all this long. I wonder, is there any way we can get some sort of like a checklist, the people who have influence, who can advise us, not just the Human Rights Commission, but I know certainly the Attorney General and others. I'm just wondering how many other bodies or professionals.
I'm sure we can get a list of different bodies. And what
even
their
just for the
functions
new
are.
members anyway, then, Chair, I'm sure.
Chair, the discussion last week was around the what's termed the Jim Wells Amendment.
It wasn't a decision.
It wasn't about abortion at large, but it actually moved into that. And I think everybody moved into that. I don't think it was just this committee. I think the Human Rights Commission, in fairness, they moved into that area as well. So it seems to me that there's a real need for clarity in this situation. And we're in the middle of a discussion about the Jim Wells clause. Now, there will be other discussions later in this committee in relation to the minister's own propositions in relation to Annan-Kefale. So there is a process of discussion and consultation, and it just seems to me to be extraordinary in the middle of this that there's a proposed legal action taking place, and it just seems to me to be a bit previous on the part of the Human Rights Commission, unless I'm misunderstanding what they've said today. So there's a real need for specific clarification in relation to this, so we all know where we are in terms of the consultation.
Okay. Look, can I get agreement then that we write to both bodies seeking clarification on that? We'll get those off pretty quickly, and then we'll return to this issue and put it on the agenda for our meeting on the 14th of January. Get a committee agreement, we do that, yeah? Okay, then, moving on to agenda item 17, Chairman's business.
Just under
Sorry, yes,
correspondence.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure there's no action in relation to the papers from William McMaster. I'm just wondering, would it be possible to ask the Ombudsman, is there a formal complaint that has been processed? I don't know if people seen it. I mean,
Yeah.
Particularly the most recent letter, and I've received a copy of this outside the committee, so I've read it, but the most previous correspondence, the 1st of December 2014, there seems to be a particular vindication of the case made by this man. I'm just wondering now if there is a formal complaint. Okay. The advisement of such.
Okay.
There's also one other matter, Chair, and that relates to page 416 and 417 onwards. And it's a complaint, as I understand it, from grassroots police officers in relation to
pensions. But we've asked for an update in that. We're going to be going up. We've asked for an update in that.
Yeah, but it's. I mean, can a complaint be made? That's the point I was going to ask. Because it seemed from their evidence. Well, it wasn't evidence, it was from the informal meeting.
Yeah.
It seemed from the informal meeting that they were barred from making a complaint. Seems extraordinary. Okay.
All is not well.
But last week at the committee member, I think we asked that all correspondence, they have made a formal complaint to the department that will be updated on the status, and we'll find out if they can or why they can't make a complaint.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I think, Chair, we also asked for the Police Federation to meet with us.
For an informal meeting as well.
I think what was agreed was the committee would write with the range of issues, and we're waiting. We'll get an update on that. The committee also agreed to schedule an oral briefing from the department when the actual SL1 proposals come through. I think, Stuart, at last week's meeting, it was agreed once you saw the response from the department, you would decide whether you wanted to have the Police Federation up for an informal meeting. So we'll be coming back to that again in January.
But I think, Chair, in this case, we can actually have a formal meeting with the Police Federation, because they are the only legally recognised body who negotiate on behalf of the police officers
I
of
think-
those grades.
I think just the issue was, once you saw the response, if you felt...
Oh, yes,
you could
that's
talk to
fair
them,
comment,
and
yes.
you can do it informally or formally.
Okay. Fair enough, okay. Move on then to agenda item 17, Chairman's Business. Just to advise that, as usual at this time of the year, Christmas cards will be sent out on behalf of the committee, and a list is available if anyone wants to see who we're sending them to. Agenda item 18 is any other business. Patsy had an item he wanted to raise about the provision of self-service kiosk technology.
Yep.
Pages 37.
Thanks very much, Chair, for allowing me to raise this. This has just been, I was contacted by a guy, businessman from London, really didn't know him before, but he has presented this to me. He says that it's proven very efficient in some of the prisons over in England. And all I'll do is just ask, has the department considered this? Apparently, it's in the interest of efficiency of running the prison and allows prison officers to get on with what they should be doing, you know. So if we could maybe ask for some detail from the department, if they've looked at it or considered it, please just.
Sure, no problem, that's fine, yeah. Okay, then moving on to agenda item 19 is the date, time and place for the next meeting. Will be the 14th of January, 2 p.m. in this room. Okay, so thank you very much, members.
The Northern Ireland Assembly